Growers say fear of ICE raids at farms are keeping the workers home, threatening to leave millions of dollars worth of fruit unpicked. Trump decided he wasn't going to give us our farm check. That's fine. We're just going to burn the crops. Let everybody starve in a country. Once known as an agricultural powerhouse, a strange phenomenon is taking place. Farmers are burning their fields, harvesters are nowhere to be seen, and the younger generation is abandoning the farms. Meanwhile, to the north, Canada presents a stark contrast. Farmers are busy signing multi-billion-dollar contracts, making deep inroads into markets once dominated by the United States. Why are American farmers choosing to burn their crops instead of harvesting them? When did Canada pull ahead? And how does this shift impact your grocery bill, your meals, and the future of your own economy? Join us as we explore the answers through 5 U.S. states now struggling with a shaken agricultural sector after losing export contracts to Canada. Please note that the information presented is compiled from statistical data and is not intended to discredit any organization. Number 1, Kansas. The first flames rose from Kansas, not from lightning, not by accident, but lit by the hands of the farmers themselves in a land once called America's breadbasket. Wheat fields now lie silent beneath a layer of ash. Harvesters gather dust. Silos are empty. Smoke drifts through parched furrows, while landowners stand quietly watching. They no longer wait for traders from Africa or the Middle East, simply because no one is coming. Export contracts once considered a lifeline have vanished as if they never existed. Just a few years ago, Kansas was still a symbol of agricultural prosperity. Endless wheat fields, convoys of trucks hauling grain to the mills, and steady export deals with Egypt, the Philippines, or Nigeria. In 2021, the state contributed nearly 20% of total U.S. wheat production, bringing in billions of dollars annually for the people here. Planting a seed wasn't just labor, it was a matter of pride, a legacy passed down through generations. So what pushed them to the point of burning their own fields? The answer lies not in a single cause, but in the accumulation of prolonged pressures. Fertilizer, fuel, and equipment maintenance costs soared. Meanwhile, tax breaks that once supported farmers were not renewed in 2025. According to analysis by the Farm Bureau, this could cost U.S. agriculture over $50 billion in the next decade. And wheat growers are already feeling that impact most directly. But it's not just prices and taxes that are suffocating farmers. There's another factor rarely spoken aloud yet, present in every field labor, or rather the absence of it since early 2025. ICE crackdowns in Texas, California, and other agricultural states have led to thousands of migrant workers being detained or leaving fields. Once bustling during harvest, are now deserted. Some farms in Kansas report labor shortages of up to 40%, leaving ripe wheat to rot. Harvested with machinery rental too. Costly farmers are caught in a painful dilemma. Let the crops spoil and lose money, or harvest and lose even more so they burn, just to be able to file for crop insurance enacted to protect border order. But in agricultural zones, the labor shortage is paralyzing. Entire production chains. The soil is still fertile, the machines still exist, but there are not enough hands. And as export orders from the Middle East, North Africa and Asia were gradually cancelled, long-time buyers stopped waiting. They turned elsewhere. Canada, without loud promotions or bold statements, Canada simply did the one thing that mattered, delivered on time in Saskatchewan, a place once dismissed for its harsh climate and short growing. Seasoned farmers are consistently signing wheat export deals. In 2024, non-Durham wheat alone brought in KD 1.7 billion as the province's total agricultural exports reached KD 45.4 billion, the third highest in its history. The buyers aren't just Egypt or Morocco anymore. They now include the Philippines, Bangladesh, and recently Japan, over to cold storage and international standard logistics systems. Shipping costs from Saskatchewan to Asia are now 18 to 22% cheaper than from the US, according to Industry Canada. But the bigger difference lies in People Canada isn't just investing in machinery. They're investing in the next generation of agriculture through the campus too. Crop program agricultural students are taken to the fields for hands-on experience, from analysing soil samples and monitoring pests by drone to forecasting yields using machine learning. They learn to view a grain of wheat as a value chain, not just a plant and harvest, but to survive and thrive in the global supply system. In contrast, the greater worry in Kansas is the absence of youth. A survey in early 2025 by the Association of American Agricultural Colleges showed only 11% of agriculture students in the Midwest intend to return to their family farms, not out of disinterest, but because they've seen their parents worn out by season after season of losses. They've seen broken machinery with no money for repairs, fertilizer bills long overdue, and bank calls more frequent than the May rain. Between Kansas and Saskatchewan, no one needs to declare victory or defeat, but the result is clear. According to the USDA, wheat acreage in the US is projected to drop to 9.4 million acres next year, the lowest since 1970. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan is expanding by 2.6% with plans to increase value-added processing and exports to premium markets. America's loss isn't just an output, but in stature. When farmers set their crops ablaze to avoid deeper losses, it's no longer just economics. It's a symbol of a system in need of rebuilding, while Kansas is cloaked in smoke and ash. Container trucks from Saskatoon still line up at the port of Vancouver, heading toward East Asia. These shipments need no slogans, they carry credibility, the one thing new contracts value above all else, and this is only the beginning. Join me as we head to the second US state where farmers are vanishing while their neighbors to the north raise their glasses in celebration. Number 2, Washington, unlike Kansas, shrouded in ash. Washington in June 2025 was quieter. No more trucks jostling in front of cold storage warehouses, no more bustling fruit pickers in the orchards. But it was precisely this silence that sent chills down many spines. The cherry harvesters had disappeared every year from Tri-Cities to Wanchachi cherry season begins with anticipation. A 1-week delay in harvest can ruin the entire export plan. A small mistake during picking can lead to rejected shipments. So farmers usually prepare meticulously. Spray schedules, picking crews, transport contracts, delivery timelines. But this year, a single message that ICE might be patrolling nearby was enough to make entire labor teams vanish overnight. There were no raids, no one was arrested, but just a rumor was enough to make people leave, according to the Washington Growers League. Many fruit-picking teams were left with fewer than 30 people, when normally there would be over 150. Those who stayed didn't dare work openly, arriving early, leaving late, working in small groups, leaving no trace for cherries. A perishable fruit with an extremely short harvest cycle being a few days late means a total loss. Hundreds of acres were left untouched during peak season. Cold storage units stood idle. Contracts were cancelled because deliveries couldn't be made on time. But crop loss wasn't the worst part. What was harder to accept was standing in an orchard full of fruit and being unable to do anything. It felt like money was falling to the ground, one cherry at a time, while the orchard owners could only stand and watch the damage. Rippled through the chain, packing plants had to cut shifts, logistics companies lost orders, roadside diners that once thrived on fruit pickers started closing early in Seattle. Supermarkets' domestic cherry prices surged at times, doubling from the same period last year, but shelves remained understowed, a paradox during harvest season. People were lining up just to buy in-state fruit, while Washington was reeling from a cascading collapse to the North British Columbia. There were no grand statements, just quiet contract signings as early as February. The BC Cherry Association had already secured nearly all 2025 cherry export contracts with China. South Korea, Japan, the EU and the UK estimated total output this year reached 5 million boxes. A record high. Cold containers were packed tightly at the port of Vancouver. Trucks from the Okanagan Valley ran 24/7 to ensure fruit arrived at the warehouses on time and up to standard. Notably, many markets that once bought heavily from US cherry growers are now imposing a 54% tariff on American products, but not on Canadian ones. As a result, all those orders shifted to Canada without further explanation. According to ITC and Fresh Plaza, in just Q2 of 2025, BC secured at least $300 million worth of contracts that previously belonged to Washington state. The biggest difference was preparation. Canada didn't wait for a crisis to respond. They had invested in logistics for years: climate-controlled cold storage, premium-grade export packaging, and preservation systems that kept cherries fresh until October, far beyond the peak US season. Even packing companies in Surrey and Kelowna ramped up operations to keep up with export demand to Asia. Meanwhile, in the US, many cherry orchard owners in Mattawa reported losses of hundreds of thousands of dollars within weeks, not only because they couldn't sell their fruit, but because they lacked the cash flow to invest in the next season. And what's more frightening than crop loss is losing faith that the next season will be any better. They didn't just lose customers, they lost their role as the export hub. And once clients sign long-term contracts with Canada, offering a stable supply chain, predictable prices and high delivery reliability, returning to US suppliers will not be easy. What unsettled people wasn't just losing money, but the quiet breakdown of an entire system: fruit left unpicked, shipments unfulfilled, workers not returning, clients no longer waiting, but the bank still calls on time. This isn't just about cherries, it's the first warning signal for the entire US fresh fruit industry. Apples, grapes, plums, even hops, the core of craft beer, rely on the same seasonal labor force. And when cherries fail, the chain of capital labor buyers. Credit begins to crack. Canada isn't rushing to celebrate, but they clearly see this as a moment to expand their influence, according to an internal report from the BC Cherry Association. Many companies have moved to sign 3 to 5 year contracts instead of seasonal ones. Stability, non-politicized operations, and investment in quality have made them a reliable supplier, while the US is increasingly seen as unstable people. In Washington don't need theories, they just need fruit pickers, they just need promises kept, they just need to believe that next season, if they work hard, there's still a chance. But this summer, standing in full orchards with nothing to sell, what they felt most was breathless. And as Canada begins sending trial cherry shipments to India and the UAE, to markets that once trusted the US, this shift is no longer temporary, it is becoming a new order. Number 3, California. If someone had said a few years ago that Canada would overtake California in vegetable exports, many would have just laughed. But in the summer of 2025, that's exactly what happened. Not with fanfare, not with announcements, but simply with shipments delivered on time, while Americans were paying over $6 for a bunch of lettuce at the supermarket. Across the border, containers of fresh vegetables from Ontario and British Columbia kept rolling steadily. They went to places that were once traditional markets for Californian produce: Japan, Singapore, the UK, France, Mexico. These were places that once bought only American goods, now proactively signing contracts with Canada simply because they need a more stable and predictable supply. According to data from Canada's Ministry of Agriculture, in just the second quarter of this year, fresh and processed vegetable exports reached nearly 3.84 billion Canadian dollars, a record high. Orders to Japan and Singapore nearly doubled in the UK. A major retail chain shifted nearly 40% of its leafy green vegetable orders to Canadian suppliers. Every bunch of lettuce, bag of baby carrots, and pack of celery, once familiar products from California, now appeared with the label product of Canada, and no one questioned it. Not because Canada was cheaper, but because they were on time. Cold storage facilities in Ontario were upgraded earlier this year. Temperature monitoring systems during transport were directly linked to import warehouses in Tokyo and Singapore. Every step was stable, and that made all the difference. They didn't aim to replace the US, they simply filled the gap when the US failed to show up. And what about the US in Salinas, once called the green heart of the nation? This year's harvest season was eerily quiet. Fields of lush romaine lettuce stood untouched. Broccoli hit peak harvest, but no one transported it. And then under the June sun, the vegetables began to wilt. Many farms owners were forced to plough their fields mid-season, not because they wanted to, but because leaving the crops there cost more than harvesting. When contracts don't come, when refrigerated trucks don't arrive, when packing plants lack workers each extra day. The vegetables stay in the field is another day of losses in just Q2. 2025 alone. California lost nearly $900 million USD in vegetable export value, according to the latest data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Those seemingly dry figures came to life on supermarket shelves. Across the western states, vegetable prices soared, but the produce was nowhere to be found. Consumers began switching to frozen vegetables or skipping greens altogether, not because they didn't want to eat healthy, but because fresh produce had become a luxury. If you're someone with a fixed income, a retiree, a laborer, a family living paycheck to paycheck, then a wilted bunch of lettuce for $6 isn't just inconvenient. It's a difficult choice between eating properly or cutting back on something else. And chances are in that burger you grab during your lunch break, the only vegetable inside is no longer made in USA, in low-income neighborhoods in Fresno, Sacramento, and San Jose. The situation was even worse. Seniors relying on federal assistance were forced to choose between buying vegetables or medicine. Many cut their vegetable intake to just once or twice a week. A quick survey by a California nutrition group showed that over 40% of seniors in the central region were suffering from a severe lack of fresh vegetables. An unprecedented figure right in the middle of harvest season, but the consequences didn't stop at the dinner table. A vegetable packing company in Fresno recently had to recall a batch of products over suspected botulism, contamination, not because farmers did anything wrong, but due to a lack of quality control personnel. When the packing line is short-staffed, when operations are patched together, even a small mistake can ruin an entire shipment. The losses pile up not just for farmers, but for the reputation of the American food industry. Canada didn't swoop in to dominate, they simply moved at the right pace when the US fell out of step. Ontario, Quebec and British Columbia had invested early in cold storage technology, end-stage quality checks and cross-border logistics systems, while the US was still struggling with irrigation policies, carbon taxes and labour shortages. The North had already quietly built a new distribution network. Quietly but effectively, an Asian restaurant in San Francisco recently had to cut 30% of its menu because there weren't enough quality vegetables to serve a school district on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Had to remove salad from student lunches to reduce costs. These were things no one thought would happen, especially in the very place that once fed the entire nation. And in Salinas, the fields remain green, but silent. No smoke like Kansas, no fallen fruit like Washington here. It's the prolonged silence from the packing station to the dinner plate. People don't read trade reports, but they know when they open the fridge and see the product of Canada label on a head of lettuce. Something has changed. No slogans needed, no declarations of victory, but Canada is delivering what the market needs most: stability. And this time, America wasn't there when it mattered. But vegetables are only one part of the meal, and when fall comes, as the grain and bean growing states of the Midwest enter harvest season with contracts already placed by Africa, the Middle East people will realize what the US is losing isn't just a crop, but a role, once thought irreplaceable, and UPN North Canada is ready for the next move. Number 4. Texas, empty barns, dead yellow grass and ranch for sale signs tilting under the sun. This isn't a movie scene, it's the real picture spreading across Texas. Once the beef capital of the United States for a long time, Texas was said to be the backbone of America's red meat industry. It once raised nearly a quarter of the nation's total cattle herd, supplying millions of pounds of beef weekly to restaurant supermarkets and even for export. But in the summer of 2025, those numbers are falling faster than people realize. The most critical reason isn't a natural disaster or widespread disease, but a simultaneous breakdown of the value chain as major markets like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore tighten inspection standards demanding traceability and hormone-free guarantees. Most Texas beef, despite its quality, still fails to meet the bar. Meanwhile, suspected E. coli cases at a plant in North Texas caused many international orders to halt, raising concerns. Not only about food safety, but also about the ability to trace accountability as a result. Many ranches have been forced to downsize, not because the cattle are sick, but because there's no place to sell, according to the Texas Department of Agriculture. Since the beginning of the year, the state's total cattle herd has dropped by over 12%. U.S. beef exports have also taken a hit, reaching only about £3 billion in Q2, down 15% compared to the same period in 2022. This has caused domestic prices to fluctuate wildly, offering no stability for ranchers. The impact quickly ripples through the lower tiers of the supply chain, over 100 feedlots facilities that fatten cattle for slaughter have shut down in just 1 year. Slaughterhouses have been forced to reduce capacity or shut completely due to a shortage of livestock and lack of stable demand. This has meant thousands of lost jobs, from refrigerated truck drivers and packaging technicians to sanitation inspectors. Small towns around Amarillo and Leach, once thriving off the meat industry, now sit quiet with vacant loading docks and job boards taken down. Meanwhile, up north, Canada has made no loud moves, but its shipments are steadily taking over the market share the U.S. has left behind in just the first 4 months of 2025. Canadian beef exports reached 1.7 billion key, over 1.22 billion USD, up nearly 19% from the same period last year. Notably, most of this growth came from countries that used to be loyal American customers. South Korea up over 10%, Taiwan up 79%, the Philippines up 31%. Why is Canada being prioritized? Not because it's cheaper, but because it delivers on its commitments. Packing plants in Alberta and Manitoba can now trace each cow by QR code from origin and feed regime to slaughter date. They comply with halal standards, avoid growth hormones, and meet full ESG certifications criteria. Increasingly prioritized in Asian and European markets, the new contracts Canada has signed aren't just transactions, they're long-term commitments of 3 to 5 years, guaranteeing both quality and delivery timelines. Meanwhile, U.S. partners are wary not just of product risk, but of shifting inconsistent policies across state and federal levels. In Texas, people may not follow export reports, but they feel the change at the dinner table. A pound of beef is now more expensive, but doesn't guarantee the familiar cut. Small diners are shrinking portions. Restaurants are switching to imports from Australia or Brazil because domestic supply is too unstable, from premium steaks to basic burgers. Every tier of consumption is adjusting, and each adjustment makes Texas ranchers feel further behind. Not because they did anything wrong, but because they couldn't keep pace with a supply chain that's been methodically built. For over a decade, beef was once an American icon, a family dinner, a holiday staple, a cultural symbol. But when that icon no longer appears regularly in kitchens and is replaced by thinner, smaller slices from somewhere else, people start to realize even the things that seemed irreplaceable can fade. Canada is different. They don't say much but act decisively. They've invested in cold chains, rigorous inspections, and prioritized demanding markets. They're not chasing cowboy imagery. They're simply winning contracts, one container at a time. Meanwhile, Texas, once the image of rugged strength, has become a symbol of where Samuel will under Memo, but losing faith in what was once considered their strength. America can grow vast fields of golden wheat, but to maintain markets like Japan, where every milligram is a matter of honor, they need more than that. They need to return to what once made American agriculture great precision and unwavering commitment. Regardless of the season for Canada, being chosen does not mean victory. It is a reminder, if one shipment fails, the entire supply chain could be reconsidered, and the Japanese will not criticize Citi. They will simply switch to another partner quietly, just as they did this time. When a perfectionist nation like Japan starts to change, the rest of the world will have to reconsider its own standards, because if even the most loyal markets demand transparency and meticulousness, down to the smallest figures who can still afford to rely on close enough number for Germany, in a country where bread is considered a cultural heritage, people do not eat just because they are hungry. A loaf of bread in Germany is a symbol of craftsmanship, of pride, and of trust in each ingredient inside. Germans always ask a question that seems simple, this: flour, where does it come from, and is it truly clean? And that question is reshaping the wheat trade map in Europe. Since early 2025, Germany has officially expanded its law on responsible supply chains. Businesses from supermarket chains to food factories must prove that the entire process of creating a product is transparent and environmentally friendly. Every bag of flour, every container, every grain must have an ethical dossier, not for advertising but for legal compliance. Under the new law, certification alone is no longer enough. Businesses need data: CO2 emissions, water usage, pesticide residues, soil standards. All must be measurable, storable, and traceable. And in this regard, Canada has been almost fully prepared. Every farm in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba applies digital